Boxy, Boxy. We're live. Hi, I'm Larry Harnish, and this is Boxy. Boxy is the Los Angeles County District Attorney's files in the Black Dahlia case. Aren't you, Boxy? Now, Boxy, I see you have company today. Yes, we're going to talk about all these books very quickly. Very quickly. Okay. In case you're new, I'm Larry Harnish. I have been studying the Black Dahlia case since 1996. Who am I? Very briefly, 34 years in journalism, 27 at the Los Angeles Times. I did a big article, a big retrospective on the Black Dahlia case for the Los Angeles Times in 1997 for the 50th anniversary of the case. And I am proud to say that that is only the second time in the entire history of the Los Angeles Times that the Black Dahlia case was on the front page. The LA Times was very squeamish about the Dahlia case, unlike the Examiner and all the other papers, and kept it inside, except for one day when, if you know your Dahlia history really well, when Joseph Dumais was a suspect, and they thought that he was the guy. The LA Times put it out front, but the rest of the time, the LA Times had it inside. Anyway, so that's who I am. For years, I would talk to anybody with a microphone and a camera. I felt it was my obligation to set the record straight about the Black Dahlia case. But I realized eventually these days people don't want the record set straight. And so I don't do interviews anymore, with a couple of exceptions that I'm going to talk about. I do the Ask Me Anything. And I do one on the first Tuesday of the month on the Black Dahlia. And then, because I was getting so many George Hodel and Steve Hodel questions, I broke that off into another one. And there will be a George Hodel and Steve Hodel session later in the month, October 28th, also at 10 a.m., also on YouTube. Let me make sure I've got the date right. October 28th. Yes. Okay. So that will be George Hodel and Steve Hodel. Today, only Dahlia questions, and questions not, this is more of an observation than a no, don't do that. Don't do that. And I should say, I usually get a troll. I will block you. Nightbot is less aggressive. I was experimenting with Nightbot, and Nightbot was extremely aggressive, and so I had to dial it back a little bit. But if you get nuked by Nightbot, sorry, that these things happen. But it is an unfortunate aspect of having trolls. There are no trolls like the true crime trolls. I've learned that over the years. So anyway, that's what's going on there. Now, the way this works is I will talk for a while. I will hold forth. I'll give a report on the book, and I'll talk about various subjects related to the Black Dahlia as they are in the news or whatever. And then I'll open it up for questions. I've got some good questions that have been submitted. They're going to be interesting. So I hope that it's a good session. I think we'll have an interesting time. The time should go quickly. And as always, thank you for showing up. Okay. So First of all, in the next Dahlia session, mark your calendars, November 4th, if I didn't say that. Okay. First of all, most important, Halloween is coming. Don't dress up like the Black Dahlia for Halloween. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Do not dress up like the victim of a horrible murder for Halloween. Just don't do that. Find some other costume. Be Harley Quinn. Be Mad Moxie. I don't know. There are lots of alternatives that aren't the victim of a gruesome murder. Don't dress up like the Black Dahlia for Halloween. Just don't do it. Okay. I wanted to say that absolutely first. Okay. Book report. I am now at 179,000 words. And you don't get there by playing computer solitaire. Certain people will say, oh, well, Larry Harnish has writer's block, or Larry Harnish has given up, or whatever. No, it just takes a long time to it takes a long time. The organization is very tricky. And I was very pleased with 1990. I think it was 1997, maybe 2000, Larry Harnish. I went through the Examiner archives and got a story that they filed out of San Diego on the first night with the with the first night with the French family. And it didn't make the microfilmed edition of the paper, but I happened to get it because I went through the clips. So thank you, old me, for I'm thanking myself 20 or something years later. Okay. So that is the report on the book. I am at this point dealing with the San Diego portion of the book. And where the reporters are talking to the French family, Dorothy French. That's where Elizabeth Short spent about a month, right before she came back to Los Angeles. Okay, so that's where I'm with the book right now. Today is, and I want to make a point of saying this. Today is the anniversary of Gene Spangler's disappearance in 1949, and it is not at all related to the Black Dahlia case. No. It isn't. Anybody who tells you that, oh, they're related, no, totally different. Okay. I just want to note the anniversary of her disappearance. We don't know what happened to her. People have inferred a lot of things, but nobody really knows. Okay, a couple other things. First of all, interviews. I said I don't give interviews. I generally don't. I got a couple of queries about background information. And I thought, okay, because the people who were making the requests are not the usual podcasters. I mean, to me, the average true crime podcast is somebody reads Wikipedia to you and somebody else does the color commentary. But these were credible people. And so I gave them background interviews. And the subject of one of them was very interesting. I call it the Black Dahlia Mystique. And the Black Dahlia Mystique is what people want to believe about the Black Dahlia case. And the narrative arc is young woman from some backwoods place who's starstruck with the movies, comes to Los Angeles, goes through this long, tawdry corruption, sleeps her way across Tinseltown until death gives her the fame that she wanted her whole life. Okay, that's basically the Black Dahlia Mystique. Very little of that is true, but I want to talk a little bit about where does that come from. And it comes from, the first part of it comes from The Badge, Jack Webb's The Badge, which came out in 1958. Very influential on James Ellroy because Ellroy's dad gave him a copy of this book shortly after his mom was murdered. Good choice, Dad. But anyway, but the original treatment of Elizabeth Short when she was murdered, when you go back and look at the original stories, were not available in 1958. And so what people referred to was The Badge. The Badge was in practically every library. Jack Webb was Joe Friday on Dragnet. So he had some LAPD credentials. The problem with The Badge is that Webb adopts this snide, demeaning, snarky, noir vibe all the way through it. And his treatment of the Black Dahlia is really the first of the murder of Elizabeth Short, is that she was a drifter. She was no good. The only thing that kept her from an unmarked grave was she got arrested. And it's very downbeat. But that was really the first, this was really the first element of the of the Black Dahlia Mystique. And because he had the LAPD credentials, there was the assumption that this was accurate. No, it's not accurate. There's mistakes in here, but also, and the main thing is, it's a very downbeat portrayal of Elizabeth Short. It is her fault that she got killed, and in Webb's view, created so much trouble for the LAPD. That's all here. Okay, so that is one element of the Black Dahlia case that did not exist before The Badge. Okay, Badge goes away. The next element is a bunch of newspaper memoirs. Okay. And these are by people who covered the Black Dahlia case. You've got Newspaper Woman was the first, Aggie Underwood. Okay. Next one is next one is For the Life of Me by Jim Richardson. And finally, Reporters by Will Fowler. Okay. Aggie Underwood did not write this. And that's the problem. It was ghostwritten by a guy named Foster Goss. And so when you read the treatment of the Black Dahlia case in here, where supposedly she just breezes past the detectives at the crime scene, no, that's not true. That didn't happen. It's all Foster. And there's other things in there. The whole treatment of the Black Dahlia case is very problematic here. Do not take Newspaper Woman as gospel. No. Okay. So that is one of them. The next book that's also a problem is For the Life of Me. That came out a little bit later. It's the autobiography of Jim Richardson, who was city editor of the Examiner during the Black Dahlia coverage. Okay. Jim Richardson is the guy who said, yeah, the killer called me up and said he was going to send me some clues and whatnot. I think that's legit. I think that really happened. The problem with this book, there are two of them. First of all, Jim Richardson was a reformed alcoholic. And the underlying theme of this book is, I was a better reporter drunk than you are sober. And don't ever forget that. That was one of the other element is, and this is why it's problematic. First of all, it has the problems with any memoir. You know, it's the individual's point of view. But second, he relies on his memory, and that is one thing reporters do that they should not do, is they rely on their memory rather than the clips. And so he has, like a lot of fallibility with memory, he collapses time. It's very common to do that. And so he will say, well, it happened here and here and here. And it's like he didn't check the clips, probably because he couldn't. But anyway, so that's another problematic book. The third one is Reporters by Will Fowler. And here is Will Fowler at the crime. I've talked about this book before. Will Fowler is really the man who founded the tradition of lying about the Black Dahlia case. Now, he told stories for years. I'm not sure exactly when he started telling his stories about the Black Dahlia case, but he would say, I was the first reporter at the crime scene. No, he wasn't. The cops showed up and they pulled their guns on me. No, they didn't. I closed her eyes. I mean, there's all kinds of things that he said. But one of the things, because I'm getting back to Jack Webb. One of the things that Will Fowler said was, Elizabeth Short had infantile, quote, in his terms, because he told me the story. He said Elizabeth Short had, quote, infantile genitalia. No, that was a strictly Will Fowler lie. So now you have, in the Black Dahlia Mystique, you have the promiscuous woman, you have Jack Webb's promiscuous woman, but you couldn't have sex. Okay. Which brings us to True Confessions. Now, I don't know if John Gregory Dunn talked to Will Fowler. Will Fowler told this story all the time. John Gregory Dunn might have heard it. But in here, the character that is kind of the fuel for the story is the so-called virgin tramp. And that's John Gregory Dunn. So that's kind of where we're building on the Black Dahlia Mystique. Now, what happens next is Hollywood Babylon 2. Okay. Hollywood Babylon 2, not the original Hollywood. This is Kenneth Anger's sequel to Hollywood Babylon 2. And I am not going to show you the picture, but this book is the first time that the uncensored photograph of Elizabeth Short cut in half was published. Before then, it had been published in the Examiner. It had been published in the Examiner with a blanket painted over her. Okay. This is the first time that the photograph was actually published. All right. So winding up with all of that is now the Black Dahlia Mystique. We have Jack Webb's promiscuous woman who couldn't have sex. And so we have Severed. Okay. How did Severed come about? Very quickly, I've discussed this before. Okay. Two people are working on independent Black Dahlia books. John Gilmore's got a Black Dahlia project going, and Mary Pacios has a Black Dahlia project going. They get together and collaborate. And later on have a huge falling out, and I'm not even going to get into that. But if you look at the first edition of Severed, you'll see that it's dedicated to her, and the later editions are not. Okay, that's your tip-off. Anyway, Gilmore goes, and Severed is 25% mistakes and 50% fiction. And he used to get mad at me when I said that, but it's true. Severed is full of people who don't exist, who never existed, and things that never happened. But John Gilmore is very, very big on Elizabeth Short's infantile genitalia. And the way he gets that in is he makes up a guy. He knows the people who were actually at the autopsy. He will say, and then he will say, well, there was this promising young detective who observed, and this promising young detective, I think his name is Herman Willis or Willis Herman, or I think it's Herman Willis. And Gilmore makes up this guy, and that's his source. So, and that's the kind of people, that's the kind of person John Gilmore was. And Gilmore also from the autopsy made up the stuff about Elizabeth Short being forced to eat feces. That's in Severed. And so now you get kind of the full-blown Black Dahlia Mystique. And then once you get into, where are you? Here you are. Once you get, and there are other books. There's Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer, which I'm not going to talk about. Then you get Black Dahlia Avenger. And this is not a Steve Hodel session, but that's kind of how the Black Dahlia Mystique came about in very simple terms. And I'll remind you, speaking of Boxy here, there is a book coming out later this month. It's by Eli Frankel. It's called Sisters in Death. It is from Frank Jimison's list of suspects. And I already did a session on Carl Balsiger. I already did a session on the list of suspects. Frankel's guy was investigated and eliminated. He was investigated in the Black Dahlia case and eliminated in that. Not in. I think Frank Jimison maybe liked him still as a suspect, but I think, and I'm relying on my memory here. I think Finest Brown said, nah, he didn't do it. But the memo links Carl Balsiger to an earlier killing of a woman named Lila Welsh. Okay. And no, I have Carl Balsiger's service records. He was not there. He was stationed in the Army in Washington. So he didn't do either murder. And if Eli Frankel has the material that he says he has, he knows his guy didn't do it. And so that's kind of why I called him out. And I will do the same thing with William J. Mann when his book comes out in January, because his guy, who I'm not naming, was also investigated and eliminated. If you want to sneak, I noticed that somebody is selling an advanced review copy of Mann's book on eBay. I think it's $14. You're not supposed to do that, but it's there. If somebody wants to read it, it's on eBay. Okay. So that's kind of what's, let's see. Yeah, I think that's about it. And again, don't dress up like the Black Dahlia for Halloween. Don't do it. Okay. No. And if I think of other stuff, I will. Okay. Hey, Joyce. Hey, Sheila. Okay. So let's go back to the submitted questions here. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. It seems like I read somewhere that the cafe owner said he didn't think that the shoes and purse found at the dump were the ones he saw originally. Is that true? No. I'm not sure if they showed it to the cafe owner, what they did, because he only saw them temporarily. Here's and what am I talking about? After Elizabeth Short was murdered, a pair of shoes, there was a purse with a pair of shoes stuck in it, left on top of a trash can at a cafe. Cafe owner calls the police, say, hey, this could be related to the Black Dahlia case. Before the police get there, the trash guy comes. He says, oh, we find this crap all the time. Pitches it into the trash truck, and away they go. And so they go to the dump, and they get a collection of purses and shoes, and they do a lineup with Red Manley. And there's a photograph that was published in the Examiner of Red Manley doing a lineup of shoes. He's smelling her purse, and it had a particular scent and all that kind of thing. He said the purse and shoes were Elizabeth Short's. Now, contrary to that, contradicting that, was the French family, and the Examiner actually flew Dorothy and Elvira French, flew them up. Jim Richardson flew them up to Los Angeles so they could look at the purse and the shoes, and they said no. So I don't think they were ever shown to the cafe owner who contacted the police. They were shown to Red Manley, and they were shown to the Frenches. Red Manley said he thought so, and the Frenches said nah. So let's see. Okay. DNA in the Black Dahlia case. Okay. What are you going to get the DNA off of? This is a recurring question, is what about DNA? Okay. Well, there were no clothes, nothing of Elizabeth Short's was ever found. Okay. The only thing they had was the stuff from her purse. And this is what gets me when people say, well, all the evidence is missing. There is virtually nothing except for what was mailed in that envelope with the cutout letters to the Examiner. That's all they have. And whoever did that soaked everything in some kind of solvent. The descriptions say, well, it was gasoline, it was kerosene, it was some kind of solvent. So whether the DNA would survive through that, I'm guessing no. And you have to remember, a lot of people touched that stuff because they didn't know about DNA. The only thing they could potentially test, is like the stamps on the back of the envelope, if they still had those, or maybe if the guy licked the envelope, maybe if they can recover DNA from that, from an envelope from 1947. So that would be it. But the bottom line is, who's gonna cover the cost of that? Because the LAPD isn't. The LAPD is only interested in spending money and devoting time and energy to cases that are going to result in an arrest and a conviction. No one is ever going to be arrested or convicted in the Black Dahlia case, and so the LAPD is not going to pursue that. Just out of curiosity, it's not going to happen. No. Okay, over here, let's see. Oh, this is a really interesting question. Okay. This will be fun. I know Elizabeth Short dated both single and married men, but do you know their age ranges? Would she date men of any age, or did she prefer a certain age? And would you say that most of the men she dated were businessmen or military types? Great question. It changed. And if you think back to your early years, at least it was for me, the dating pool when I was a young man was other single women. Fine. And then it became, all of a sudden, there was women who were divorced with little kids. And that's kind of what happened with Elizabeth Short. During World War II, she liked to date single guys, but she was picky. She would date officers. She would not date the enlisted men generally, as a general rule. And so Matt Gordon, who was a captain and then a major, that was her style. The enlisted men, she didn't have a lot of time for that. So that would be one thing. Now they were, they were peers. They were generally, in World War II, they were generally her age group. So after the war, the dating pool of eligible single men, now war veterans, dried up because they're busy. The World War II generation is getting back to civilian life, and they are starting families and that kind of thing. And so Elizabeth Short was still dating single guys about her age, maybe a few years older. I think one of the biggest age differences was Gordon Fickling. And I think he was something like 7 years older than Elizabeth Short. But beyond that, no. And I think of the quote from Elizabeth Short's roommate, Lynn Martin, who said that, well, Lynn Martin. She's known as Lynn Martin. She's a woman with a lot of aliases. She said, Hollywood is full of men about 40 who want to buy you dinner and then expect you to pay for it with yourself. And Elizabeth Short was not doing that. But she did once she was in LA, once the dating pool was kind of drying up for single guys, then she would date divorcees. The only reason she went out with Red Manley is he admitted, he finally owned up to the fact that he had been married, but he didn't tell her at first that he was a married guy. No, he didn't do that. And so that, she mainly stuck to single guys. Except for, as I said, Red Manley's kind of the outlier simply because he claimed that he was single. But generally they were peers. They were a few years older. I would say the other outlier would be Mark Hansen, who was significantly older. But, the status of their relationship, whether it was really all that hot or not, would be something else. But anyway, generally it would be when World War II was going on, military, afterwards veterans. But again, she was picky, she wanted guys who had been officers or had been officers or were in some kind of business. The average guy on the street, although you never know. There is one example of these two guys, Bill Robinson and his roommate. And Elizabeth Short tended to hook up with sort of tawdry sidekicks. And her tawdry sidekick at this time was Margie Graham. Margie Graham was a few years older. Margie Graham was ostensibly married and had come out to LA to see her husband ship off in World War II. And Elizabeth Short and Margie Graham kicked around Hollywood a lot. Margie Graham was a little more aggressive in going up to guys and making friends. And so when Elizabeth Short was teamed up with Margie Graham, she was a little more aggressive, assertive, what have you, on her own. No, but that's how Margie and Elizabeth Short ended up with Bill Robinson and his roommate and living at the, I think it was the Guardian. That was Margie Graham initiated that. So that was kind of that. But there were a lot fewer guys in the military after World War II. They were either like military adjacent, something like that. Okay. Let's go over here. Okay. What inspired Jack Webb to write The Badge, and does it reflect his experiences with the Los Angeles Police Department and the TV show Dragnet? If you read The Badge, you will see that it's all the stories that could not be done on Dragnet. Okay. And what is the main concept of Dragnet? There are no unsolved crimes on Dragnet. The police always get their man. It's always from arrest to conviction. And there are no unsolved cases. And so, and they are of a certain, and I don't want to get into a long thing on Dragnet or we'll be here all day. But there was a certain image that Jack Webb was putting forth on Dragnet. And I'm talking about the original Dragnet. I'm talking about the radio show and then the first gen of the TV shows. And then later on with Harry Morgan, it's like, by that point, I'm done with Dragnet. The radio shows are good. I have to say that the radio shows are really fun to listen to. The early TV shows are just radio shows with pictures is what they are. But the whole book of The Badge is very downbeat. It's very downbeat and kind of snide and all that sort of thing. It's just the voice. It's sort of that film noir voice that Jack Webb adopted. Okay, let's see. How did Elizabeth Short meet Aunt Toth? What am I talking about? When Elizabeth Short was living with Mark Hansen, this nightclub partner invested in. Mark Hansen was a partner in the Florentine Gardens. He was a partner in a bunch of movie theaters. and that sort of thing. And he was significantly older than Elizabeth Short. And he had this house on Carlos, a block off Hollywood Boulevard, and it was, you could walk from his house to the Florentine Gardens. That's where it was. It's gone now, but it used to be there. And Hansen had a buddy, Leo Himes. He was buddies with Leo Himes. Leo Himes was a married guy, and he had a girlfriend on the side. The girlfriend on the side was Ann Toth. And so Leo Himes, this is the long answer since you asked, Leo Himes parked his girlfriend, Ann Toth, at Mark Hansen's house. And so Ann Toth was, of course, hands off. Mark Hansen, no touch, Ann Toth. And so Ann Toth was from the Bay Area. And so she had been up north for, I forget if it was her birthday or holiday or something like that. And in the meantime, Elizabeth Short had moved into Mark Hansen's house. And so when Ann Toth returned then to Hansen's house, she found Elizabeth Short was living there. And that's the first time she met Elizabeth Short. And that's how it happened. Ann Toth was one of the really good Samaritans in Elizabeth Short's life. She befriended her. She loaned her money. She went down immediately once Elizabeth Short was identified. Ann Toth and Mark Hansen went down to homicide and tried to help the investigation. When Elizabeth Short had a fight with Mark Hansen and moved out, Ann Toth found her an apartment. And so Ann Toth was really one of the good Samaritans. The women in Elizabeth Short's life tended to be either the good Samaritans or the tawdry sidekicks, like Margie Graham. And so Ann Toth is one of the good Samaritans in the Black Dahlia story. Okay. Is Jim Richardson the reporter who called Elizabeth Short's mother and said that she won a beauty contest? No, he had the guy do that. The guy who did it was a guy named Wayne Sutton. Wayne Sutton called up the mom, but Elizabeth Short thought it up. So that was the genesis of that. Jim, and in where are you? And in For the Life of Me, he says Wayne Sutton thought that up. No, Richardson thought it up. He just hung the blame on Wayne Sutton because he didn't want to be responsible for it. But that was a Jim Richardson thing. Okay. Let's see. Do you know the name and location of the lunch counter soda fountain? Yeah. It's not there anymore. It was Lander's Pharmacy. It's one of them tree names. I think it's Pine. She was staying at an apartment house that was called, I think it was I think it was, there are pictures of it where it's called the Atwater, but it changed names. But it was about a block away. And so the drugstore lunch counter was Lander's Pharmacy. It was across the street, about down and across the street. It's not there. I think it's a Best Western hotel now, but it's gone, long gone. Okay. Did Aggie Underwood think Red Manley was the real killer? No. I mean, it's you have this duality between what's in this book, which is ghostwritten by somebody else, and what Aggie Underwood actually said. I think many, many years later, Will Fowler, where are you? Many years later, Will Fowler set about to clinch his role in the Black Dahlia story. And he interviewed all kinds of people. He interviewed Aggie Underwood. He interviewed a photographer who was there by the name of Ben White. And he recorded these interviews. But if you listen to the recordings, it's Will Fowler saying, yeah, I was there first. And the interview with Aggie Underwood says, no, you weren't. No, you weren't, which is pretty funny. But what Aggie Underwood thought and what she knew, it's kind of nebulous. And I know from listening to that interview, she had some information on Red Manley's later life that was just wrong, so it's like, you really have to be careful with your sources. Okay. Let's see. Okay, Lindsay, again, the DNA. All there is the stuff that was mailed to the examiner. That's it. What was in this envelope? There is nothing else. There is absolutely nothing else. They don't know. They never found her clothes. Jewelry, if she had any, they don't know what happened to that. But remember, when she disappeared, all she had was the clothes she was wearing. She had checked her suitcases at the bus station. And so all she had was the clothes she was wearing and her purse. So that's it. And they never found anything except for what the killer mailed to the examiner. That's all. And the guy wiped it with solvent. So, that's all there is. Okay, let's see. Are the LAPD files accessible at all, or are they still closed off to the public? Okay. That's a mixed question. The LAPD files in the Black Dahlia case, they are voluminous. And when you read Michael Conley's, The Waiting, the Black Dahlia is used as a plot element. And he says, well, again, the evidence is missing. The file cabinet is mostly empty. No, it's not. I've seen the file cabinet. Unlike most people, I have actually seen the file. I wasn't allowed to dig through it. But when I was doing this story in 96, the detective at the time, Brian Carr, opened the file cabinet for me, pulled out the drawers, and it's crammed with stuff. But it's like you would not believe what's in there. In the 1950s, Finest Brown flew back to Massachusetts to do some investigating. And there's his plane tickets are in there. I mean, it's like it's all kinds of stuff. Anyway, the only thing the LAPD will release is what's already out there. So they have done a few things that were released. Either they were released during news coverage in 1947, either then, or there was an exhibit at the police museum in Highland Park. And it was James Elroy Presents Elizabeth, and it was in 2012. And of course, James Elroy has to get top billing. But there was a bunch of stuff that was put on display. Now, none of it was really helpful except for because it was mostly stuff that was already out there. Okay. The reports that were already out there and that kind of thing. That was that. Or stuff that was absolutely no help to anybody. There's the Woody Guthrie stuff. Yawn. There's I think it's fingerprint cards and mugshots of some woman who said she killed Elizabeth Short, and of course she didn't. So I mean, it's not any of the good stuff. It's just kind of random stuff. There were some pictures that were probably the most interesting. It was from these two guys who were from Idaho, who right after the war they came down to Long Beach and decided to see LA, and they rented a room in the hotel where Elizabeth Short was staying. And so they struck up a friendship, and she said, I want to go dancing at the Palladium. And so they said, sure, let's go to the Palladium. So they took the streetcar. Nobody had a car in those days. They took the streetcar up to Hollywood. And that's where you see the pictures of her at Grauman's Chinese Theater and in front of Earl Carroll's and all that stuff. That's from that little trip. But so those photographs were in that James Elroy Presents Elizabeth. But that's beyond that. No. They're not going to turn loose of anything else in the foreseeable future. And the reason, I'm not going to get into it. The reason the LAPD won't release the files is, they're not going to give any, no. So that's why. And I'm not going to make this a Steve Hodel session, but that's enough. Okay. Let's see. Can we learn or ever know exactly where the murder of Elizabeth Short took place? I don't see how. Barring some kind of, death. Well, you wouldn't even be a deathbed confession at this point. Nobody really knows. We know where she wasn't killed. We can say that, but in terms of knowing where she was, no. No idea at this point. I don't think anybody with any integrity can say, yeah, we know. We can guess. We can infer the type of place it would be. It would be a place where the killer had a lot of solitude. He could spend a lot of time with Elizabeth Short once she was, tied up, dead, what have you, um, bathing the body and mutilating her and cutting her in half and all that. That took a long time. He had a place where he could do that without fear of being interrupted. And so that is that eliminates a lot of locations. But to be able to specifically say, oh, it was here, no. And it wasn't the Astor Motel. They looked at that. No, wasn't the Astor Motel. Okay. Let's see. Did any of the members of the Short family that you have spoken to ever express opinions of Cleo Short? No. I would. Did any of them believe he was capable of murder? Did any of them suspect him of murdering Elizabeth Short? Okay, no and no and no. First of all, I was very respectful with Elizabeth Short's sisters and various other relations, and I really didn't want to push it that hard because they are so traumatized. Elizabeth Short's family is so traumatized by all the attention. The only thing they want is for it to go away. That's what they would like. All the ghoulishness, like dressing up like the Black Dahlia for Halloween, don't do it. As far as the Elizabeth Short's family is concerned, this interest in the Black Dahlia is just a symbol of, just how sick the world is. They don't talk about it. They don't talk about it with, acquaintances, maybe within the family, but no. So, I mean, would I say, well, what was Cleo like? Because the sisters don't know he left. The only person who might have an opinion was Virginia, and she was dead. She and Adrian were both dead by the time I began the project. So I don't know. I can tell you that the Short family, the ones that I have talked to, have a very low opinion of Cleo for sure, and rightfully so. But that's about it. Let's see. Did Elizabeth Short have a type of man she approached when looking for money, since she was engaged to a pilot officer? She could fit in more with upperclassmen. Elizabeth Short's had a shtick. She had a number of sympathy stories because she basically got around Los Angeles never working. And so she got money from her mom. She got money from Gordon Fickling, supported her. He would send her money, but she had a whole litany of sympathy stories. And that's one of the difficulties in researching the Black Dahlia case is Elizabeth Short was the first person to fictionalize her life. And so she told a lot of stories about herself that weren't true. She said she was married and her husband was killed in a plane crash. None of that's true. Her fiance was, but they were never married. She would say they had a son that died. I mean, she had all kinds of stories. But one of her favorite sticks, and she was doing this in Long Beach at the lunch counter in Long Beach, where she got the Black Dahlia nickname. Her thing was that she was from a very fine Boston family. No, she wasn't, but she carried on as if she was from a very fine Boston family. And she was appalled by the way they do things out here in primitive, unsophisticated Los Angeles. That was her shtick, which is an interesting approach. But that was generally what she did. That was generally her persona out here. So yeah, it's she was careful, except for one time apparently. But generally, she had pretty good sense about guys who would be gentlemen and wouldn't pressure her for sex. But the thing is, and I say this again and again, Elizabeth Short didn't have hundreds of dates. Elizabeth Short had one date hundreds of times, and it was very scripted. It would go a certain way. They would have various topics of conversation, And at the end of it, she would most likely hit the guy up. And she had any number of ways of asking for money, having trouble cashing a check, um, something like that. I mean, or she needed money for medicine. I mean, she had all kinds of stories for why she needed money. But it was generally, what happened generally was it would be one, maybe two dates, and then the guy would realize nothing's going on, nothing is ever going to go on, and they would go away. And that was how it generally worked. Does Zodiac have anything to do with the Black Dahlia? No, absolutely nothing. Only in the parallel reality of Steve Hodel. Okay. Here's a submitted question. Are there details in here how the suspects were cleared? And this person is referring to the list of 22 suspects that's in here from Frank Jemison. And it's just exactly what you would think from investigation. Okay. What do? You have this guy that you think is a suspect. What do you look at? Well, you look at their friend. You talk to their friends. You look at their work record. Were they at work? Pay stubs. All sorts of things like that. Somebody was so-and-so was at work at the time. So-and-so was out of town at the time. With Leslie Dillon, it got down to, because he was in San Francisco, regardless of what P.U. Eatwell said. Leslie Dillon was in San Francisco when Elizabeth Short was killed. He didn't do it. But it got down with Leslie Dillon to, they talked all kinds of places where he had worked. And there was kind of a break in his work record. But I'm relying on my memory here. He had a garage. He and his wife had a garage sale, and there was a receipt for, I think it was a mattress that was dated right about that time. And so that was kind of the clincher. But you cannot imagine the amount of time and shoe leather that they spent investigating Leslie Dillon. But the way they did it was just good old-fashioned gumshoeing, going around talking to people, checking records. Do you know about so-and-so? What kind of character is he? There was a lot of that. So that's how they did it. Are the French family of San Diego still around? Not as far as I know. There was a son, but Dorothy French is dead, and I'm sure Elvira French is dead. So, no, not really. Okay, let's see here. Oh, is it the possibility? And this is one of the things that floated up later on. The stuff that of Elizabeth Short's that was mailed to the newspapers. Do you think that somebody just found this stuff and didn't want to get involved, and so they mailed it in? And it's like, really? They found this stuff and then they cut out pages from the address book. Okay. And then they doused it with solvent. Okay. And then they addressed the envelope with cut out letters. And that was just some random person. No, that was from the killer for sure. No question about it. Whoever mailed in that stuff had access to Elizabeth Short's purse, which means they had access to Elizabeth Short. So no, that was definitely from the killer. None of the other letters were from the killer. Just that one. That was it. Okay. Let's see. Did you think 30 years ago when you started, you see the case solved in your lifetime? No, I mean, it's when I started the project, the prevailing books at that time were Severed and Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer. And I formed the opinion very quickly that anybody who thought they had solved the Black Dahlia case were out of their minds. And that was my philosophy for a long time. Anybody who thinks they've solved it, no. It is so difficult and so complicated. And, the Black Dahlia has a powerful mojo. And I don't want to, get too much into Steve Hodel, but, people get poisoned by their own thoughts. And a certain retired detective is just drunk on his own bullshit. It's that simple. Why do so many identify Elizabeth as an actress? Okay, that's actually a simple question. It is the Black Dahlia Mystique. It is the trope of the aspiring actress, the movie-struck young woman who comes to Los Angeles and wants to get into the movies and sleeps her way across Tinseltown. And there's a lot of precedence for that. I mean, it actually happened. There was a place called the Studio Club, and that was set up in the early days of the silent movies by Mary Pickford and others, so that girls who came to Hollywood or were working in the movie industry had a safe place to live, because the movie industry very early became predatory. And there are fictional treatments of that. There is What Price Hollywood. There is the first version of the A Star Is Born with Janet Gaynor and Frederick March. There is that whole, that is kind of the trope. It's actually pretty common. What they said about Sharon Tate. Sharon Tate was murdered and in death found the fame that she wanted her whole life. It's not true, but there is just this compulsion to form it into a narrative. Okay. It's the Black Dahlia Mystique or whatever you're talking about. They take a series of events and form it into a narrative. They make it a once upon a time, and then they end with the moral of the story. I mean, and that is what happens to girls who come to Hollywood with, stardust in their eyes. They end up horribly murdered if they come to LA. Okay. Let's see. Is there any way to find out if that envelope still exists, or will they never say? I don't know. I think the last I heard of it, I think it was in the LAPD crime lab once upon a time. Where it is now, it could be in the file cabinet. I don't know. With her birth certificate and the address book and all, that could very well be in one of the folders in the file cabinet. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah. Somebody's asking about the guy who was sort of the landlord of the Chancellor, where Elizabeth Short stayed for a while, Glenn Wolfe. They looked at him, but he was eliminated very quickly. Okay. Last question. What do you think Betty Short is a person? Many degrade her, but some. What does that leave us with? My opinion of Elizabeth Short is she's like this set of Russian the Russian dolls where you open one and you find another one, and there's another one and another one. And Elizabeth Short is like that. You start with what's been written about her, and you pull out those dolls, and then you get down to what she said about herself, and you start removing those dolls, and you get down to this little teeny weeny doll in the very center. And that's kind of who Elizabeth Short is. When you peel away all the stories that other people have written about her and what she said about herself, there's not a lot left. I mean, she was mysterious. She was secretive. She had her highs and lows, however you want to describe that. She would be moody and depressed. She would be really happy and upbeat, and then she would be moody and depressed. Pretty common. Secretive. I mean, one thing that came away from the French family is that she was moody and secretive, and there were things what she didn't want to discuss her marriage, probably because she wasn't married, or the birth of their son, which of course, because it hadn't happened, that sort of thing. But she was elusive, and the closest parallel that I can think of to talking to Elizabeth Short would be talk to a homeless person, and I'm not talking about the guy with no shirt and tattoos sitting on the street corner, but talk to a homeless person who presents well, who has a woman who has a rolling suitcase and is pulled together, but is homeless. and sit down and talk to them. And not just for 15 minutes to get their cover story, but just sit there and listen to them and listen to them and listen to them. Because I've done that. And because Elizabeth Short was, by the time she was killed, Elizabeth Short was essentially a homeless person or unhoused or whatever you want to call it. But she had all the mannerisms and stories of a homeless person, which is why I give money to a charity in the Boston area that works with homeless people, because that's essentially what she was at the end of her life. But sit down and talk to a homeless woman who's pulled together and has a little rolling suitcase, and buy them a cup of coffee and just sit there and listen to them and let them talk and let them talk and let them talk. And, they will tell a very sympathetic story at first. I mean, that might be the first hour. This is a long conversation, but eventually the demons come out. If you talk to one of these homeless, because I've done that and I know, after the first hour, this whole other side emerges. And one of the homeless people I talked to bought a cup of coffee, bought a breakfast, and oh yeah, and it took about 2 hours. Oh yeah, I'm in touch with Bill Gates. I'm in touch with Mark Zuckerberg, and Apple has stolen all my music, and I was a recording artist, and that's when, as I said, that's when the demons come out. But you have to be really patient to sit there and listen to them for that long. But that's the closest analogy I can come to of what it would be like to sit down and talk to Elizabeth Short. It would be like that. Whether you want to go do that is a question that you can answer, but that's what it's like. And it's interesting. I had a homeless lady live with me for a month, and that was an education. I would never do it again, but she had a cover story. She was, this was when the real estate market crashed. She had been a real estate agent. I checked that out. Yeah, she had. But wow, I was not prepared to deal with some of the mental and emotional and addiction problems that she had. But this other lady that I'm thinking of, she had written a book. She had been involved in a mega church, and boy, howdy, she was off her meds, and she liked living outside. Both of them liked living outside. The one lady, the ex real estate agent, oh, I don't like the shelters. There's too many rules. It's like, okay, you tell me. And the other woman, she didn't, for whatever reason, she didn't think it was safe to sleep indoors. But they don't volunteer that sort of thing at first. They kind of know when they're dealing with somebody from this other world, what's going to be presentable. But yeah, do that and just see what that's like. Okay. And I think with that, we are just about done. It's been fun as always. I'll do it again in a month, which is, what did I say? November 4th. And we'll have even more to talk about. And again, don't dress up like the Black Dahlia for Halloween. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't effing do it. And I'll see you next time. If you're interested in the George Hodel and Steve Hodel stuff, that's October 28th. Otherwise, it will be November, what did I say, 4th? 4th. Okay. Say goodbye, Boxy. Okay. See you later.